the Tower of Babel incident in the Bible, when the languages were created, the people broke up into their small inbreeding groups and they traveled any place they felt like traveling. You could walk to Australia. There was no water in the way. If you lower the water, if you lower the ocean, that's a fact. There's a land bridge to every place. So for the first couple of hundred years, the people dispersed around the world, including to America. And then as the melting ice caps caused the water to rise, the continents became separated. The Bible says in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. Well, Peleg lived, where's my chart here? Peleg was born 100 years after the flood, by the dates given in the Bible, and he lived for 239 years. During Peleg's time, the Bible says the earth was divided. I think that means a couple of things. I think that's when the earth was divided up into the different languages and consequently nationalities. I think the people that were in these small inbreeding groups developed unusual traits. Black skin might have been a mutation, or white skin might have been a mutation that took hold. When the population was small, a mutation can catch on quickly. I don't have any problems with mutations. I don't have any problems with natural selection. Natural selection works, but it doesn't prove evolution. It might prove creation. Natural selection is not evidence for either side of this argument. It has nothing to do with the argument. After the flood, the populations began to spread out, and they could come over to America or any place they felt like, and the oceans kept coming up deeper and deeper and deeper. Maybe for a 400 or 500 year span, the ice caps were advancing and retreating, maybe for 1,000 years. During that time, cities would be built near the beach and consequently have to be abandoned as the waters come up. And maybe that's why we have legends of lost cities like Atlantis, and why there are some unusual features underwater. You know, there's some, looks like buildings in 30 feet deep water down by, Bermuda. That could be explained from the flood. The consequences of the global changes, the climate changes, would cause a rising and lowering of the ocean, I think, pretty dramatically. So a long answer to a short question. The creationist would say the continental shelf was exposed, and that's why we have underwater erosional features like there are canyons bigger than Grand Canyon underwater, which means it must have been above water, or it wouldn't erode like that. Okay, yes, sir.
One question about the Pangea theory. They have found fossils that match up on the coast, the northeastern coast of South America and the in coast of Africa that match, and they're found nowhere else but right in a specific area. And when they're put together, there is an area population of these animals and rocks that are found nowhere else in the
world. I would argue that they're not found anywhere else. Nearly every type of fossil is found nearly every place. Dinosaurs, camels have been found near the North Pole. Now you can look at that two different ways. The North Pole used to be at the equator and the Earth has tipped, or the North Pole has moved, continental drift. Or the world was perfect before the flood and camels lived at the North Pole. Or the flood lasting a year could have floated the dead carcasses anywhere, any place in the world. So the fact that there are similar fossils found on both continents does not disprove the creation model. It might prove there was a flood 4,400 years ago and the dead animals drifted to those places and that's where they landed.
But there's also, when they find, well, I guess it wouldn't be the same, but they find polarized rocks that through time periods switch polarization like a time clock, and they find that they match up.
Magnetized rocks.
Right. And they match up almost exactly on the two coasts when they put them together. The stones that they find are, I don't know how to quite put it.
Yeah, he's right. The geological evidence is very extensive on this, and it's not based on the geometric matching of the patterns. For example,
and it's not so much biology.
That's a trivial part of it.
Right.
The details of the geology that it's been accomplished over the years, 20 years, 60s and 70s, is really what proves this. It's not sketchy.
Doesn't prove this. This is evidence that's interpreted for the continental drift.
Yeah, it's definitely a theory. Yeah,
definitely a theory. If you would look at the actual maps that have been made of the magnetic lines at the bottom of the ocean, they are nowhere close to what appears by the time it gets into the textbook.
How do you know if it's only 1% explored?
That's the point. It's only 1% explored. It could be that the mid-Atlantic ridge is one of the rips where the fountains of the deep broke up. If the earth ripped open right there, the rocks would be twisted all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, I've seen the evidence for this, and it's not like you say. It is conclusive.
It is catastrophic down there at the bottom. Thomas G. Barnes is probably the world's expert in geomagnetism. He's a University of El Paso, Texas physics professor. He just retired here a couple years ago. He's written many papers for the government on the Earth's magnetic field. Thomas G. Barnes, because of his intensive research in the Earth's magnetic field, has become a creationist. He says for several reasons. Number one, the Earth's magnetic field is declining. It is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. This world can't be more than 25,000 years old, Thomas Barnes says. Because 25,000 years ago, the magnetic field would have been so strong, the heat generated would have destroyed all life on Earth. It was his evidence in magnetism, and especially studying the lines at the bottom of the ocean. Thomas G. Barnes, he still lives in El Paso, Texas.
Didn't you just say that just because it's decreasing now doesn't mean it's decreasing for
Right, no proof of it. He says, based on, of course, I could use the same argument for carbon dating.
Right, yeah. That's
Unitarian assumptions for all of it, right. Based on what we observe today, since Gauss and those fellows, measured the magnetic strength of the Earth, it is declining. NASA thinks the half-life is 830 years of our magnetic field. Now, they measure it more than anybody probably, but
That has nothing to do with matching the corresponding magnetic patterns that exist on both sides of the rift. That's what you're really looking at.
I'm saying if you looked at the actual data coming off as they drag their thing down there and get the compass fluctuation, you compare that to by the time it gets in the textbook as nice neat lines, 40 million, it's nowhere close.
Yes,
it is catastrophic down there.
It is. The data is good. It doesn't look like you say. It's not bad like you say it is.
I can assure you that actual data, if you can get the actual readings of the maps, compare them to what, by the time it gets into the textbook, there have been many smoothing out of the lines. But it is still not proof.
That's not true. Now, I happen to have a master's degree in oceanography, and I have really looked at this in detail.
Okay.
And it's not sketchy like you say it is. It is good data.
Could it be that the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is one of the rips, fountains of the deep broke up, things flipped over, rocks were flipped every which direction?
You
And
can
from
go out there and see it happening right now today.
Oh, it's spreading, no question.
Right now.
It is spreading. Now, they watched it with lasers bouncing off of the satellites, to see if Europe and America were getting further apart. After 8 years, the satellite fell out of orbit, and entropy again. But after 8 years, they watched for continental drift in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. None was observed. But they said, well, because of atmospheric twinkle, the laser going through the atmosphere gets 0.046 arc seconds of atmospheric distortion. There may have been 3 centimeters, and we didn't detect it. Very true. There might have been undetectable because of allowance of error. So they interpreted that the continents are moving 3 centimeters a year or something like that, and they may be. I'm not arguing that. There isn't real positive proof that they are, at least the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. We see the vents down there and things like that. There's no question they're hot water vents, and there seems to be new material forming down there. But again, that doesn't disprove the idea of a flood 4,400 years ago. If the fountains of the deep broke up, the continents may have slid hundreds of miles in a few hours, and crashing in someplace else lift up the Himalayas. Read the books on evolution. It talks about India crashing into Asia, raising the Himalayas. They use the same terminology. But it all could have happened in a few years. It doesn't have to take millions or hundreds of millions of years for that stuff to happen.
Doesn't disprove that it could have taken that long.
Could have been either way. That's my point.